Hello and welcome to 15 Minutes with Longevity. My name is Giselle Wertheim-Ames and I'll be your host. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how to have a healthy marriage and how to cope when faced with conflict in the family setting. With me in the studio is Nikki. She's a creative parenting expert, as well as Bev Mulun, a self-esteem engineer. Now, Bev, I'm going to come back to you now because I really want to understand what a self-esteem engineer is. But Nikki, I think we know in South Africa that the divorce rates are incredibly high. In fact, you've suggested as high as 70%, which means that only 30% of marriages actually succeed. How is this happening? What are the milestones in a relationship that come into conflict that could result in this very high failure rate?
I think, Giselle, the problem we start off with is that we have this fairy tale of Cinderella and Prince Charming coming along and it's all going to be exactly as we think. And then along come the children. And that changes everything because the energy changes in a household. We take our eye off our relationship ball at many different times in our parenting journey. So when it's the first baby and then the second baby and sometimes the third. And then at different stages of development of our children, for example, when children start going to primary school, the family diary is taken over by the school diary. So we don't have as much say in how our whole week unfolds. Then we get Saturday sport. So now our lives are revolving around children and school. You have to make a very concerted effort
and we got jobs
to spend time.
That as well.
Yes, yeah.
The jobs.
Don't forget the jobs.
Yeah.
So to keep a relationship alive, we have to make a concerted effort to focus on each other from time to time. And that means that when we have work, life, and home and family, it's not all the time. And sometimes people feel left out, whether it be the mum or the dad, and somebody's career takes off, and we all have different rates of personal development as well. When somebody has an aha about life, and off they go on their spiritual journey, and the other one's left behind. So there's this playing catch up all the time, and we have to find little plateaus where we meet. And I think when we don't have those plateaus from time to time, that's when things go awry. And let's face it, relationships are not easy. They take time, they take effort, they take energy. And if you don't have that and something in common, then life gets a little bit tricky.
I mean, are there specific times when people are more vulnerable? I mean, we have spoken about the young kids and that. Is it an age-related thing? So the older you are, the more mature you are, the less inclined you will be to just throw in the towel very quickly? Or, you know, when you're younger, I mean, it's just an interesting concept of how we manage
It does
conflict.
seem in the sort of latter 30s that some people start getting itchy feet and wondering if they've made the right decision and can they stick at this relationship for the next 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, imagine if in the future we're going to live to about 150.
Yes.
Imagine having to make a decision about who you're going to spend 90 years with. So that changes the complexion on a whole lot of things. And then, you know, when you're moving towards your 50s as well, there's that sort of, sure, how much time have I got left and have I done everything that I wanted to do with my life with the people I wanted to do it with?
Sure. Now, I do want to understand what this engineer story is. So perhaps you're going to quickly tell me, Bev, explaining exactly what that means in the context of what we're speaking about.
Well, as briefly as possible, I think that people are born with a fairly healthy self-esteem and then it gets eroded. Not intentionally, but it gets eroded over time by our parents, by our peer groups, by things that we hear, by the stories we begin to believe about ourselves. And I think that things that are broken need engineering and things that are not entirely right also need engineering. So the title morphed from different things and it landed up as a self-esteem engineer. Because it's a passion for me to help people find their greatest strength, put themselves together in a way they can pursue their passions, pursue what they're about, pursue their needs, more importantly than anything, without feeling there will be a consequence they can't survive. And people living without self-esteem and without enough self-esteem generally feel they won't survive different interactions, different standing up for my needs, different opportunities.
So it's interesting when we speak about, you know, in the workplace there's all this effort and all this focus on managing conflict and performance management and dealing with issues. I mean, in the family environment, there are no HR managers or other managers or guidelines, company guidelines. So how do we, you know, when we engage, I mean, that's a really interesting concept, the whole thing of self-esteem, because that's key also to the relationship. So when we're looking at all these milestones, how do we create that environment in a family situation that we can manage conflict productively and that it doesn't spiral out of control?
It's not an easy thing, because you're also bringing over the threshold two different family dynamics, two different backgrounds, two different environments. And I think the byline for me of self-esteem and living with it and communicating with it is that no matter what happens and no matter how I feel, I preserve both your and my dignity in our interaction. So you've hurt me, you've let me down, I still preserve your dignity and mine. I'm disappointed in you, you've cheated from me, you've cheated on me, you've lied. Whatever it is, I make certain that in my interaction there's a dignified communication. So it doesn't matter what your background is. It can be Mediterranean, it can be South African, it can be volatile, it can be whatever, provided in the interactions I make certain that the dignity of the environment and the people involved are preserved. And there's communication strategies for that, and that's what I love about self-esteem. It can be learned. It's not something that you have to be born with. People will say to me, well, I don't have it and I don't know how to communicate. Does that mean I've had it for life? I'll never have a healthy relationship or engage healthily? And of course that's not true, because it's a skill-based thing, self-esteem. One can learn it.
Now, Nikki, you've written so many books, and you're a working woman, you're a career woman yourself. This divorce rate and the conflict rate amongst women and men at the moment, do you think a lot of it has to do with the changing gender roles in society?
I think some of it does, because when we talk about self-esteem, you know, if one of you overtakes the other in a dramatic way and the other one has no skills or tools to catch up, that can be an issue. But I think that we need to understand some real basics about human nature. And the two drivers for me are attention and control. Who's in control? And are we getting the attention we feel we deserve? Because whether we are adults or whether we're children, if we feel shortchanged on the attention front, we play up. We all have strategies to draw attention to ourselves. And sometimes they're negative seeking attention strategies. And we have to be aware of that. And when you start reading each other's behavior in terms of what's the attention need right now and who's feeling out of control, you can generally read. The people who are demanding that attention have an empty cup, and they're finding ways to say, do you see me? Do you hear me? Am I important to you? Our children play this game with us, and we play it with our spouses and our partners. And the more mature partnerships, where there's more EQ, where there's higher self-esteem, tend to read the cues and read what's behind it rather than reacting. Where we have a continually reactive situation, then it becomes finger pointing. You, and we forget there are three fingers pointing back here. And you know, we fall into a trap of thinking that somebody else can make us happy. But we're the only people who can make ourselves happy. And it's a trap we fall into with our children as well. When I ask parents what their wishes are for their children, it's success and happipiness. Every time a coconut. And I think we've got it wrong. I think we should be aiming for resilience and resourcefulness, because then our children can take responsibility for their own happiness and success. So as partners in a marriage or in a relationship, we need to be taking personal responsibility for our own happiness and success. And I think many issues come about when we look to the other person to make us happy, and we fall into that trap.
And that's a really grand problem to solve, actually, because that's a really, you know, that's about people becoming more self-actualized and doing a lot of work themselves. You're talking about the children. I think the whole dynamic of children in a relationship is also really fascinating, and how children in situations of conflict react, and how we help them again in those situations, because you often see this where some kids side with one side or the other depending on what sex they are, you know, the boys or girls, and sometimes they decide with the mother. That's I think often fathers feel quite left out of it. I get that sense from people that I deal with and see. So how, again, when we're in these situations, do we, as the more adult versions of the family, deal with managing how the children have to deal with conflict that may be going down?
I spotted a wonderful quote recently, and I can't remember who it was from, but basically our children grow up in the space between us. And I love this analogy because we are not in the space. It's the space between us, and our responsibility as parents is not to pollute the emotional space between us. We can hold negative ideas and thoughts about each other, but when it comes to our children, we have to try and maintain as neutral a position as possible so that we don't pollute our children. Now, this is quite idealistic, I know, but I'm sure that Bev in her conflict resolution has come across this as well.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think it's very important, exactly what Nikki's saying, that parents learn how to communicate their own issues outside of the family environment, because there will always be an overflow. And we do have to teach our children how to manage conflict, and sometimes we have to model that. But if we display it on an ongoing basis, we do pollute the waters that the children have to swim in.
So you're talking actually physically being in that situation and displaying anger or rudeness
or words
or whatever.
Aggression or manipulation or anything destructive. I don't think that it serves a purpose that helps a family become and remain cohesive and to work together.
Is it practical though and realistic to think that it can be somewhere else? Because usually those things happen in the heat of the moment, or you know, often it's something that just tips it over.
I think I've always mentored, and I've seen it work so often and so powerfully, is that there has to be a moment of exhale. There has to be the moment before engagement that you can just take a moment and say, can we go and talk about this for a second, and just remove yourself, or excuse us, we're going to go and speak about this. But there has to be that opportunity.
So just quickly, I'm going to ask you both just to answer this in your own experiences. If you're a family in a conflict situation currently, or you know, or starting to face it, what is your advice to that family unit, to the couple, to particularly the adults who have to lead that family unit? First to you, Bev.
It's not a simple thing, and obviously I've done the majority of my parenting as a single parent, and in that conflict environment, when it comes up, there's other dynamics to manage. But the best I've tried to do with my son is to teach him how to source what he's feeling in the moment and what is important for him, and to voice that need so that he can build resilience, so that he can become a person who is able to manage his own world and to move through it. And I keep the conflict and the attention towards the conflict as minimal as possible with him, so that he only has to focus on what his need is.
Great. Nikki?
Well, my husband said something really interesting recently, and it was the famous rugby line: crouch, touch, pause, engage. And the pause is very, very important if you want to not wrap your children in cotton wool, but to protect them and to protect that space and keep it as neutral as possible. And all relationships, even the best of them, go through wobblies from time to time. And I think it's really important that we model for children that we take responsibility for our own behavior and our own emotions. And I remember very distinctly when my son was about 3.5 and we were having a wobble, actually saying to him, because children try and heal, they try and heal their parents, they try and fix it, or they take it on. And we were finding our son staying up late because he knew that's when we talked. And eventually, actually, we woke up to this fact, and I remember sitting down with him one night, putting him to bed, saying, this is Mummy and Daddy's time now. This is our time. This is not your time. And Mummy and Daddy will fix this. This is our problem, not yours. And I think it's so important not to lay the baggage on our children. And this is in any scenario whatsoever. It's the same in a corporation. We all have personal issues. We all bring them with us wherever we are, but we need to find ways to offload in a healthy way, to transform that negative energy into something else so that we don't pollute the environment.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Stay well, be healthy, and I hope to see you here again next week for your dose of health news. Good night.